Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Coming up today on The Story.
This podcast was not my idea at all. Our oldest was transitioning from cot to bed, and I just started laying down on her floor with her as she was laying in her new bed, and I just started making up stories. Whatever came to my head at the time, I'd just turn into a little story until one day my father-in-law, he said, "I've listened to you tell these stories for a long time now. I think you need to turn it into a podcast."
The Story.
G'day, I'm Jimmy Colfax. Welcome to The Story. Well, Sam Ramsden was busy minding his own business as an electrician when suddenly he finds out he has the #1 trending children's podcast in the world. How did that come about, and what role did his faith play in all of it? We'll find out as Sam shares his remarkable story with us today. Sam's joining Eric Scatterbo in our Melbourne studios, but first, let's have a quick listen to a little bit of Sam's program.
One day, two little boys named George and Harry were very excited because today they were getting to go to the Aviation Museum. "Okay," said Panda Pete, "let's go." "Here," Panda Pete handed George a very funny-looking key. What's this?" said George. "If you put it inside any plane, it will be able to work."
Sam Ramsden, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much for having me.
Glad to have you with us. And normally I invite guests to the studio to tell their stories. You were already here. I found you in the studio and I asked you, could you just stay in the studio and tell your story?
Yeah.
Why are you here?
Well, I do a kids podcast, and the team at Reach Beyond have been really gracious in letting us use their space.
The Reach Beyond studios here on the east side of Melbourne, we should say.
Yeah, which has been such a blessing to me and my family and my podcast. So I'm really grateful because it's given me a space that's great for recording, and I don't know, I find I can think really clear in here. So yeah, we record our stories in here now.
Oh, that's great. Now I should say your dad, John Ramsden, was a guest on my program in the past.
Oh.
And so I became friends with him on Facebook. And then I noticed a few months ago, he was posting stuff about you, telling stories.
Yes.
And of course, your father is a very creative guy. He was in a band and all that. You can go into the archives to find your father's story. And all of a sudden, he's very proud of you. And so
proud
I
is
saw
probably an understatement.
yeah, every single appearance you've been on, like Channel 7 News and Light FM and Channel 9 News.
7, 9, and we were on 3AW for a short little,
interviews, radio, media. The podcast is going #1, trending in the world and all that. It's all happening. I'm seeing it on your father's Facebook page, and I'm thinking, man, I got to get this guy in the studio sometime. How do I get a hold of him? And little did I know, you're using the studio right here.
Yeah, small world, crazy.
But you've been pretty busy, being on all these different TV shows and everything. So we grabbed you today, got you in the studio and said, just stay there after you recorded one of your podcasts.
Yeah.
And we said, just stay there. Let's find out the remarkable Sam Ramsden story. So where did it all begin? Where were you born and raised?
Oh, well, I grew up pretty close to here. Home for me as a kid was in Heathmont. And we grew up, we had an amazing little family that I was always really grateful for. And went to church. This is the only church that I remember.
Your dad's a pastor?
He is one of the pastors there, on the same block that the Reach Beyond studios are on at Canterbury Gardens Community Church in Kilsyth.
Right across the car park, yeah.
Yes, I've looked at this building pretty much my whole life. It's fun to actually get to go into the secret rooms. Did you ever know
there was a studio in here?
I knew, but they were like this mythical kind of area that we weren't allowed into. So,
I've been here for like 20 years.
Oh, mate, we always looked at the doors and like, I wonder what it looks like in there. So it was fun to kind of get to see behind the curtain eventually.
Oh, great. So you're raised in a creative family. Tell us about your dad.
Yeah, so my dad, he thinks differently to most people. He's a very exciting person who has a brain that he's been blessed with that can do some incredibly creative things. He was in a band for a long time called Joint Airs. He ended up... Christian band.
Yep.
He was a school teacher who loved to cause chaos and do ridiculous things. He ended up in a couple of corporate companies and just brought a lot of fun and joy to those places with a lot of different creative means, and always when we were kids was always making up ridiculous stories and all kinds of things. So
yeah, I was wondering, what was the influence he had on you?
Oh, I am absolutely the person that I am today because of the family that I grew up in. My dad taught me so much about fun and life and actually living and the importance of Christ being the center of all of that. It was always something that was just a big part of our family and a big part of our household was who we are in Christ and who he's created us to be, and that things should be fun and that you should try and bring fun wherever you are. So yeah, Mum always used to tell us as well to be outwardly focused. So we were always trying to help other people have a good time, help other people enjoy themselves. And it was just something that was kind of instilled into us from a very young age.
Okay, so going back to your childhood, did you do any of these things, creative things?
I was creative, but probably not in the most productive sense. I was always very good at making up stories and things as to why I hadn't done the naughty thing that I'd probably done to try and get myself out of trouble.
That's a different type of creativity.
It is a different type of creativity,
but
no, like particularly, it wasn't something that I would have defined myself as a creative type kid.
Is that right?
Yeah, because I don't know.
You have the #1 children's podcast in the world.
And I'm probably the most surprised out of anyone that is the case.
Wow.
It is not something I would have ever seen on the horizons of my life. But
I'm thinking, you must have been so creative when you're in school, but no.
No, I was silly. I was always a bit of fun. But yeah, I would never have pictured myself in much of a creative space. So yeah, it's a bit of an interesting spot.
What did you excel at in school?
I loved sport. Sport was the thing that I was obsessed with.
Like your father? He was a pitcher?
Dad played baseball for Australia. Yeah. And as a kid, I was convinced that I was going to play Major League Baseball over in the US.
Oh.
Yes, but it's funny. God, I think one of the biggest themes throughout my entire life has been I make plans, but God's plans are better. And it's often not what I expect. I know, but like as a kid, I was convinced that baseball was going to be my life. And I ended up playing at a reasonable level. I got to play some games against Japan as a junior. But when it came to the selections for the Australian team to go across to Japan and play, I didn't play in the main league because it was on a Sunday, and I chose to go to church instead of playing in the main league of baseball.
Kind of like Eric Little in Chariots of Fire, that story?
So they came up to me in the selections, and one of the selectors came over to me and he said, look, from everything we've seen, you're definitely good enough to play on the Australian team, but because we haven't seen it in the Sunday comp, we just can't take you. And so that was devastating because it was an absolute shattering of my dream. And it was this moment of realizing that faith was actually going to cost me things. And in this situation, choosing God had actually cost me my spot to go over to Japan and play baseball for Australia against Japan.
Oh, wow.
And it kind of, it was a bit of a turning point for me. But I look at where I am now in life and that sort of thing and go, I could have become very obsessed with baseball and that could have become my entire life. And I feel very blessed that God kind of moved me away from it and moved me into different things in different spaces. And I'm grateful for where I am now. And it would have been different if I had have headed down that path. So God's always in control.
Well, let's back up a little bit. How did you become a Christian in the first place? I mean, obviously you're in a Christian family.
Yeah, exactly. It was one of those things that I couldn't tell you a defining point. I remember being a really little kid and praying with my sister on my bed because she's like, you need to ask God into your heart. And I'm like, okay, cool. How do we do that? And so we sat in the room together one night and she talked me through a prayer of salvation and that sort of thing. But for me, I think, I can't remember a time when God hasn't been a part of my life. It's just been a journey of learning more and more and more what that actually means. And I've learnt that the more I learn about who God is, the more I learn about my own faith and it just develops and changes. So there's probably been no particular point of, I think I became a Christian at this point, but it's certainly been a lot of different points of realizing that I know a lot less than what I thought I did at different stages and God just revealing more and more of himself over the time. So it's more of a journey than a single point.
Any rebellious period?
Not particularly. I think I had... there's one little story of a girlfriend I had once upon a time who she wasn't great for me, and my mum actually ended up having a bit of a prayer group with a few of her friends, and they were actually praying for me in this situation. It ended up ending and that sort of thing, which that was a blessing. It kind of was a stage in my life I look back on, and I wasn't as happy and joyful as I would normally be, but even in difficult times and times when you're making mistakes and that sort of thing, God teaches a lot through those moments as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of lessons I learned through that time that I look back on now and go, well, as much as it wasn't a great little stage of my life, I've learnt from it. And there's been a lot of that. There's been a lot of stages in life which have been uncomfortable, which have been painful, all those kinds of things. But you look with hindsight and see God shaping and growing you into who he wants you to be. And that's just all just part of it, isn't it? So,
any creativity that would give us any indication that this was on the horizon to come?
Well, I guess probably the most defining probably the closest thing is I do youth group at the local church at Canterbury Gardens, and
that involves creativity.
Did it for a long time, and I always loved making up games.
Oh, okay.
Making up ridiculous games and ridiculous nights and things, and creating experiences that kids would remember. It was something I'd love to sit down and just go, what could we do? And just come up with something completely different. So I learnt that my brain thinks very differently to most people, and I think in different spheres and that sort of thing.
Youth pastor type roles.
Oh, never pastor. Always avoided that term. So
involved with youth ministry.
Yeah, I just loved it. I just loved youth ministry, and getting the opportunity to think of an idea and then see it actually come to life and watch the look on these kids' faces as they're putting together a spaceship with glowing lights and running around the church throwing M&Ms and things at each other, all kinds of ridiculous things. It's just those moments of like using your creative brain to serve God and seeing those kind of moments. It brings so much joy.
That's great. And then how did you become an electrician?
Well, that's a bit of a funny story. So when I was about 13, it was at a family Christmas and I was sitting down at the table and my uncle turned to me and he goes, do you know what you want to do when you grow up? And I was like, I got no idea. He's like, do you want to sit at a desk? I was like, I don't think so. He's like, well, you're going to do a trade then. I was like, oh, okay. He's like,
that's simple.
He's like, if you're doing a trade, it needs to be something licensed. So you can pick between electrician and plumber. I was like, okay. And he's like, and do you want to play with other people's poo? I'm like, no. He's like, cool. You're going to be an electrician. I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to be an electrician.
That was referring to being a plumber.
Yeah, exactly. And so from then on, I had decided, I guess I'm going to be an electrician now. So I went through and still finished school and everything like that, which I was really grateful for.
Did you have any interest in electricity or?
Not particularly, but it seemed like a interesting little path. It seemed like something that was active and out and about and that sort of thing. So I stumbled into being an electrician, and then I stumbled into owning my own electrical business. That's a fun little story.
Yeah, yes, please share.
Well, I never planned on starting a business. I always told everyone there is no way you will ever find me running my own business. It's just not going to happen. And I've learnt that when we say never ever, God often goes, we'll see about that sort of thing. It was 2 months before me and my wife were about to get married. She was still studying full-time to become a physiotherapist. And the company that I was working for went into liquidation.
Oh.
And I'd been saving all my annual leave and RDOs so that we could have some time off when we first got married and all that sort of thing. And then all of a sudden I had no job and my wife didn't have a job. She was working one shift a week in disability care. And I was like, wow, I need to find some work quick so that I can support this family as we both move out of home and that sort of thing. And the only thing that was going at the time was changing smart meters for the government. And to do that, you had to set up a company. And so I was like, oh, well, I'll just set up a company just to do this. It'll just be short term and then I'll get a job somewhere else. And so we started setting up the company, and it's called Ramp Electrical. And the reason that it's called Ramp Electrical is because I wasn't taking it seriously at the time. And the accountant called me and he's like, oh, this company's almost done. What do you want to call it? And I was actually coming home from the skate park. I was like, Ramp Electrical. And so there it was. And then the smart meters, they'd promised heaps of work and this sort of thing, but the company that we were working for lost the contract. So all of a sudden, there I am, freshly married, supporting a wife, trying to pay bills and all that kind of thing.
You created a company.
With a company that's set up, and I was like, I guess I work for myself now. So I've been making it up ever since. And so I joke with a lot of my friends that I run a side business called What Not to Do Business Consulting because I have made every single mistake there is to make in running a business because I had no idea what I was doing. But it's been successful? No, not at all. It has been a growing experience. It has been something that it has rarely ever been profitable. It has been something that I firmly believe. I say it to a lot of people that I don't think God put me into this business to make money. He put me into business to grow me into the person that he wants me to be. Oh, wow. There's been times when we should have liquidated. There's been times when only by the gift of a random person that ended up in our letterbox, we've been able to make wages. Yeah, this is not the usual success story. This is I'm just getting by story. Yeah, it has been a painful experience running an electrical company, but I wouldn't trade it for anything because what it's taught me about who God is as provider, what it has taught me about who God desires for me to be, even in difficult situations. They're invaluable lessons that you can't learn from comfort. And so we've spent so much of our life just completely dependent on God and just relying on Him for literally basic daily needs.
You're listening to The Story. Today, Eric Scatterbo is chatting with electrician Sam Ramsden, who's the creator of the hugely successful children's podcast, Silly Stories for Kids. We'll hear more of Sam's story, including the unusual way the podcast came about, when we return, right here on The Story.
The Story. If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Colfax and this is The Story. Today, Eric Scatterbo is chatting with Sam Ramsden, the creator of the hugely successful children's podcast, Silly Stories for Kids. But, as we'll hear, having a children's podcast wasn't really Sam's idea in the first place.
So now you're married, you have children, you're an electrician.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
So this podcast was not my idea at all. I have 4 kids now, but back when I only had 2, our oldest was transitioning from cot to bed, and I just started laying down on her floor with her as she was laying in her new bed, and I just started making up stories. Whatever came to my head at the time, I'd just turn into a little story.
No plan, just made a story?
No plan whatsoever, and just kept going, and it just kept going on and on as we had more kids. The stories kept going and going until one day my father-in-law said to my wife, I need you to get your kids looked after. I need to speak to you and your husband. And we were like, oh no, what have we done? Have we forgotten to pay them back money or something? Do we owe them money or something? What's going on? We were both nervous. And then he took us out and sat us down and he said, I've listened to you tell these stories for a long time now. I think you need to turn it into a podcast. And I was like, wow, what are you talking about?
So he had the vision.
Yeah. He had been researching and all this kind of stuff and sat us down and explained. He's like, this is how podcasting works. This is what you need to do. If you want to give it a go, I want to back you and I want to push you.
Wow.
So from then on, I just started watching a bunch of YouTube to try and understand what it actually took to record a podcast, edit a podcast, put it all together, and just started. And we put together a couple of little stories to get ready and then planned a launch date, which funnily enough was like 2 weeks after the birth of our 4th child, which greatest time to start a podcast. But oh well, we look back and it's been a fun little journey. So it kicked off and I honestly thought that I was just going to be making a catalogue of stories for my own kids to show their kids one day maybe, and maybe a couple of our friends might listen or something, but it took off and it just started to grow and grow and grow. So quite to my surprise.
Wow. So what do? You just lay on the floor in the studio and pretend you're with your children? I mean, how does this work?
Well, now I sit down at my at the studio and I pull out my phone because kids can put their names in to be in the story. And so
so you incorporate kids into the stories.
So I'll go through the list and see where we're up to, and I'll write down the name of the kids that are going to be in the story. And then I'll come up with a tiny little starting idea. It might be a basketball. It might be a cookie. It could be anything, just whatever the first thought that kind of comes to my head is. Yep, object, place, something, anything. It's always quite random. And then I just start talking. And yeah, it's interesting. Like I must have some unforeseen structure in my head because I always seem to end up to be around that like 12-minute mark without me even thinking about it.
Really?
It's really weird.
Which is really ideal for a children's story.
It seems to be good. So I just open up my brain and let it go because I've got quite a crazy little brain. It is most of the time trying to keep it under control. And so for me, sitting down and doing these stories is a chance to kind of use my brain the way that God's created it and just unleash it and see what comes out. So it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it.
So when you first started telling these stories to your children, did you have a goal? Did you have some type of a bigger, like to teach lessons in life or? No
big picture view. Basically, we realized that for our family, if I laid down and told the kids a story before bedtime, it gave my wife 10 to 15 minutes of time to use however she wanted, because she works so hard with our kids. She's amazing, my wife. I'm incredibly blessed with the wife that God's given me. But for me, that was my way of like running a business and that sort of thing. It's very busy and it's time consuming. And so for me, that was my way every night of going, hey, here, you take 5 minutes. It might, 15 minutes. She might stop and have a cup of tea, or she might clean a few things around the house so that she feels like she could stop later. But it just became part of our family's rhythm that I would do that before bedtime to give her a moment to help kind of get the kids ready for bed. And it just became that. There was never any real big thought or process behind any of it, which I don't think there's real thought or process behind much of it, but it's all just been coincidental and just the way that our family's kind of operated. So,
okay, so I'm trying to picture this. You lay down with your children on the floor of their bedroom. What do you just say? Well, hey, let's talk about this, or how does it work?
It always just started the same way that all these stories still start. I'd just say one day and then just start talking.
One day and start talking.
Yeah, so just say one day, 3 little girls, because it was always about my kids at the time, say their names, and then most of the time back then I wouldn't even have a starting thought. It wasn't until I'd say their names that I'd see what came to my brain next and just go with it.
Oh, wow.
And so it's been really interesting to see all the different characters and things that have come out over the years.
You have regular characters?
There's a couple of ones which are the main ones that people love, but there's so many
imaginary
random
characters?
Yeah. There's
Pim?
Pim, yes.
Okay.
The purple fuzzy creature named Pim and the cheeky little teddy bear named Teddywinkle are the main two, but there's probably about 30 or 40 that crop up here and there. And
oh my goodness.
Yeah, because it's just wild. You'll just be sitting there.
Like you're just taking a trip on your imagination.
Yeah.
I heard a little bit, some samples, and like people go inside of cameras or something. I don't know if
the funny thing is that I get to the end of telling a story and I often can't even remember a lot of the things that I've said. It's not until I go back to kind of prep it to put up as the podcast that I listen and I go, oh, that was a bit of a funny one. So it's wild. It's basically following where my brain leads and just seeing what
just going
stories
on
and
adventures, these characters and your children.
Magical items, all kinds of crazy things, often with a big element of chaos that often resolves itself, occasionally doesn't, but I love bringing joy to people and I love having the opportunity to say or do or make something up that makes people laugh and smile. So that's always been the aim behind the content in the stories, is to create joy. Yeah, bit of fun, not overthought, not too conceptualized, not trying to push any particular message, but just good, honest fun. So,
okay. Now, I'm a first-time grandfather.
Yep.
So please help me out.
Yep.
If I'm laying on the floor with my grandchild, my grandson, and I want to share with him a story, what tips do you have for me?
If it's not your gifting, leave it to someone else.
just press the play button on your podcast.
Well,
no, come on, you can do better than that.
No, like honestly, one of the biggest things that I've learned lately is that God creates us all different. And he gives us different skill sets and different abilities, which is fantastic because it allows us as the body of Christ to be able to meet the needs of so many different people because we are so different. And I have learnt that when you are serving God in a capacity that he has designed you for, it is so joyful. And trying to do things that God hasn't designed you to do can be not the most fun. And it's something that I've learnt by trying to serve in different areas because I felt like I should. And it wasn't areas where I was gifted and it feels like work and it feels difficult. But serving in a youth group capacity where God has given me a love and joy for that kind of stuff, and serving with this podcast where God has given me a skill set that is different to a lot of people, it brings so much joy. But it's also shown me that in this space, I can do something that most people can't. Because of the way that God has wired my brain, it is different.
Very interestingly.
And I love it. I love the brain that he's given me with. It has its quirks, it has its difficulties, but it makes so much of who I am. But I had a day once where one of my mates was over and one of the kids was like, you two can do a story competition. And he was like, what? And I was like, oh, I tell the kids stories each night. And they're like, you can go first, to my friend. And so he laid down and tried to tell a story. He has many giftings. Storytelling isn't one of them. And he stopped and finished. And my daughter very, very honestly said, that was really bad. I was like, oh no. But it made me realize.
How come you're not as good as my dad?
Exactly. It made me realize how strange what I'm able to do is.
But it's a gift.
It's only because of the way that God's wired me. And so it's one of those things. I encourage people.
I want some tips. Now, what do you got for me?
You want some tips. If I had to give you one, it would be to try and see the picture in your head and try and follow it.
Oh, okay.
So that's what I do. Just
picture
see stuff in your head and follow it. So keep talking and see what comes out. And I think the biggest thing that I would love to share is to encourage anyone listening to get to know who God's created them to be. Because the more you know the God that we serve and the more you understand who he's created you to be, the more opportunities you can have to be able to serve him well in a way that probably no one else could serve. And so for me at the moment, in the time that God's got me in, we hold everything with open hands. He can give and he can take away at any stage. But at the moment, I'm getting to serve God in a way that not many other people could. And I just want to encourage anyone who is listening to think about what that might be for them. Because serving God, how he's created you to be, brings so much joy to you personally, but also brings so much of Christ to the world that we live in.
Amen. Sam Ramsden, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Hey, thanks for the opportunity.
That was Sam Ramsden chatting with Eric Scatterbo about his life journey and about the events in his life that led him to creating one of the most successful children's podcasts in the world. To find out more and have a listen to some of his crazy and imaginative stories, the website is sillystoriesforkids.com. Once again, that's sillystoriesforkids.com. Also, you can listen to Sam's podcast on your favourite podcast player. Just look up Silly Stories for Kids. Well, thanks so much for joining us for Sam Ramsden's really cool story. Until next time, I'm Jimmy Colfax, encouraging you to share your story with someone today.
Next time on The Story.
And so they bring me into the game and the guy hits the ball back to the pitcher. I'm running towards second base. The second baseman gets the ball and just threw it straight through me. And it hit me right in the face from about a metre away.
Double play coming up. There's the first one. And he threw it into the runner and hit Ramsden right in the face. He is hurt.
John Ramsden had dreams of becoming a professional baseball player. But those dreams were shattered after a tragic incident during a game which ended his career. We'll hear how John's life takes one unexpected twist after another next time.
The Story. Just another way Vision is helping you look to God daily.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.